Hi everyone, I'm Alora Bailey, and I will be presenting on analyzing novels and short stories with Edgar Allan Poe's A Telltale Heart. I'm so happy to be able to do my presentation on one of Poe's works. I love his stories. They're some of my favorite, and I'm just super happy to be able to present on this particular topic. Anyway, let's get right into it. So, step one for your analysis is that you'll want to do a summary. So, summaries are very basic. They just ground you in the story and they let readers who may not be familiar with your work become familiar with the content. So, a lot of the times with literary analyses, you technically have an audience that kind of knows the work that you're talking about. But if you don't, summary kind of just helps. Like, for instance, in the Telltale Heart, a basic summary is that the unnamed narrator, also the main character, is confessing to the murder of an old man. That is the basic summary. A longer summary would basically be this narrator, the main character, is basically living with this old man, and he wakes up and watches the old man sleep every night, and he becomes obsessed with the old man, specifically his eyes that can be seen through the lantern. And one night he gets so obsessed that he basically kills the old man, dismembers the body, and hides it in the floorboards. Apparently, one of the next door neighbors heard the old man cry out when the main character killed him and sent the police over to check. The main character is able to easily talk with the police. He's super confident. He shows them around. He says the old man's on vacation. However, as he's talking with the police, the main character starts hearing this noise from under the floorboards, and he realizes that it's the old man's heart beating after he's been dismembered. And he gets really anxious by hearing this noise, and he becomes more frenzied, and finally he rips open the floorboards and reveals that he killed the old man. So that is the basic summary of A Telltale Heart and how you'd probably do a summary in a literary analysis. So step two, you'll want to give context. So this is basically just researching the author and other work. This can help you gain insight to the story by just kind of knowing maybe what the author's perspective on things might be, what time period they were in, and context can also stem from the story depending on how things may be worded. So, for example, in The Telltale Heart, Edgar Allan Poe, he is the author. Love his stuff. He's renowned for poetry and short stories, specifically in the horror and detective fiction genre. He is part of the Gothic literature movement. He explores the human experience through irrationality and madness, and his books often feature characters suffering from melancholy, insanity, obsession, stuff like that, which matches pretty well with basically what the Gothic literary movement was. And he's from the 1800s. That can also give context to the story about maybe what time period it might be set in, what to expect, as far as modern technology wise, stuff like that. So step three, we're going to analyze the setting. So where is the story placed? For example, in the context of The Telltale Heart, it'd be in the old man's house. Why is the setting set where it is? As far as this short story goes, the setting isn't a huge part of the story. It's not super stated on, but we can assume that it's set at night in an old man's house in the 1800s. And specifically with the 1800s, the why would probably just because Edgar Allan Poe lived in the 1800s, so it'd probably be set in the 1800s. And then just keep in mind that most stories would be changed if the setting changes. And that will depend story to story. Like, for instance, in The Telltale Heart, I personally do not think the story would be changed much if it were set in like an apartment in New York at night in the modern times. The story can still happen the way it happens. The next door neighbor will hear the old man cry out, police will be sent. Maybe the main character would probably have to hide the body somewhere else other than floorboards unless they're loose enough. But like, it's still the same kind of story. There's still the meat of the story, same themes and all of that are still told, just maybe in the modern setting. So it really just depends on the story and how important the setting is to the story and whether or not it'll change. So step four, we'll look at plot. Plot's pretty important as that just basically has all the points that you basically need for a story. So you mainly need the main problem or the conflict. In this case, the external conflict of A Telltale Heart would be the old man, the main character's obsession with him, and the internal conflict is the main character's madness, and how he slowly kind of descends into madness. Then you got the climax. In the case of the story, the narrator commits the murder. That is the climax. That is where all the tension is. And finally, the resolution would be the narrator confesses in terms of this story, because that's all that's kind of the end, the resolution. Things are tied up. It might not be a happy resolution, but it is a resolution. So, yeah. Step 5, you'll look at characters. Characters are the driving force of stories. You won't analyze every character because there may be novels that have like a million side characters. You'll only really want to analyze the ones that are like the most important, like say the main character, a villain, stuff like that. You'll first want to describe the character and then consider the portrayal. How is the character portrayed? In A Telltale Heart, for example, you have the narrator, that is a character, and then you have the old man, that's a character. And you don't really want to focus on the neighbor or the police because they aren't really mentioned. They aren't a big part of the story. And then you want to describe the character and consider the portrayal. A lot of people online believe that the old man kind of portrays death in a way because he's dying. He's old. And one of the main arguments is that the narrator kills the old man because he doesn't want death in his house. He's almost like afraid of death, and so he kills the old man because he's an example of death. So that can be a portrayal of a character that you could consider. Step 6, literary devices. You know them, you love them. They make the story fun. They convey meaning. They create mood. In The Telltale Heart, two that I recognize the most are symbolism and repetition. The heart beating under the floorboards after the old man dies is basically a symbolism of guilt, is from what I gleaned and from what others online after I was doing research gleaned. And then there's a lot of repetition in the story when the man mentioning the old man's eyes, the main character mentioning the old man's eyes, and the main character basically saying the heart under the floorboards is beating. He says that a lot. He like repeats himself. He's like louder, 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 and like it just kind of helps build the emotion. So, yeah, literary devices. Step 7 that you want to consider for a literary analysis would be themes. They're big ideas that the author comments on, and there can be multiple themes in a story. They can give you kind of a starting place on your thesis for your literary analysis. In A Telltale Heart, guilt and madness were two main themes that I noticed. Pretty explanatory, the guilt and the heart and kind of that whole connection. The madness, just basically the main character descending into this madness. So, and then finally, you'll want to tie it all together. This is just basically you making your final thesis. You'll want to make it an arguable claim, and you'll want to connect themes and other evidence that you find with proof. It doesn't necessarily have to be themes. That's just a suggestion that I saw during the readings and doing my research. But you'll just want to tie, after analyzing everything, all those steps, you'll want to tie it all together and make whatever claim that you want to. So, yeah, that is how you would analyze novels and short stories with an example of The Telltale Heart. So, yeah, I hope that all made sense and that I didn't go too fast. And yeah, bye-bye.